There's a motion to approve it. I make a motion to approve it. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. All right, let's move on to unfinished business, which is the approval of the September 22nd minutes. Is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, unanimous. All right, let's move on to reviewing the revised ethics forms. Yeah, and then we'll do the ethics ordinance. So we have new forms from Tony and Greg and Joe. And I think, Alyssa, you thought Kevin Dayhoff's was fine, right?
Yes, Kevin and I went through it. And so let me open that file. Give me one moment.
Actually, we have a revised form from Ben Yingling as well, I think.
Yeah.
Did the one from Greg just go out? Because I don't have that one.
This came in.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Within the last hour and a half, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So I think the problem that we saw with Kevin's was in G. Yeah.
The family member.
Yeah, I think it had to do with Schedule G, so I'm scrolling down.
And I think I already emailed back that I was fine with what you had said.
Yeah.
I think I already initialed that one and dropped it off, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I think that you did.
Yeah, me as well. So I don't know if we need to do anything further with Kevin's. You want to move on to Tony's?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So Tony and I went through what he needed to do, and I believe his looks to me to be acceptable, but you all need to take a look at it.
What did he do? Change G?
He needed to add his, excuse me, his place of income, his source of income.
Okay.
For his print business.
Yeah.
So he's done that. Okay. How about Ben's?
Yeah, Ben should have fixed, it was the item A as well.
Yeah, he did. He initialed that. Let's take a look.
And then I don't think he had G filled out correctly, but he did. He went ahead and fixed that as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So his looks good to me at this point.
Yeah.
All right. How about Joe?
Yeah, so Joe's was a little confusing because it was on schedule underneath where the Schedule G answer was. He added an additional piece that was in response actually to Exhibit F. And so I asked him to sort of clarify, answer question H no clearly, and then draw an arrow to the answer, the place where the answer belonged.
And I think he had section A kind of, he fixed that as well.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Did anyone see any other issues with his?
No.
No, we're okay with Joe's. So that leaves Greg's.
Yeah. And Greg was the one who had just sort of clicked the wrong box on page 3,
Ownership.
page 2, I guess.
I don't know.
That was the only issue with that one, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
He wasn't sure that he had to list his condo. No, but he did. Yeah, he's good.
Okay.
Yeah. You put yes in initiative. Okay. Were there any other amended forms?
No, I think that's all.
Okay, well then is there a motion to approve the revised ethics forms from these 4?
So be it.
For second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. All right, let's move on to the revised ethics ordinance.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused about, was this intended, and is its text intended to simply, sorry about that, simply mirror the state, or in any respect, does this go further than the state ordinance?
It does go farther than the state ordinance.
Yes.
Many of the changes are, in fact, either intended to address the disparities that go back to 2010, and some of them are intended to address new changes to state law that occurred in 2017, 2018. But there are other changes in addition to those that were requested by members of the current city council to respond to actual perceived I don't want to say improprieties, but circumstances that gave rise to at least an appearance of impropriety. So,
Can we go, what I would like to do, if possible, is if the new ordinance itself, or the ordinance that is an amendment to the existing one, if we could just kind of walk through, and not that we need to spend a lot of time, but just kind of address it page by page to kind of keep it organized on what changes, you know, is that okay with you guys, Damien and Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to be here an hour. I got to tell you that, because I'm up against the wall. But what I'm most concerned about, it seems to me that if this thing mirrors the state ordinance, we're kind of stuck with it. And it's probably prudent that we, at long last, do it anyway. But to the extent we took it further, and I guess I'd like to differentiate between taking it further relative to elected officials and taking it further relative to appointed officials, and whether, you know, we treated those.
Damien, we can at least go through those changes that are not, you know, that are not state related.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
That to me is where we should focus our energies, because I think we stay out of trouble if we mirror the state ordinance. But
Agree.
the question lies in, do we go further? And, you know, there's only so much we can do. We can make a recommendation either way. The council's going to do what the council's going to do. But I'd like to focus on those differences from our revised ordinance from the state ordinance, if that's okay.
I'm fine with that. So Alyssa, I'll let you
Yep.
walk us through. Let's
Okay.
go ahead and start.
So if you go in 16-2, there's a change to the definition of doing business with the city to account for doing business with entities that aren't engaged in contracts with the city, but do get most of their funds from the city. And I don't know that you describe that as a more strict provision than the state law, but it is different. It makes the definition of doing business with the city more expansive.
Is that the second part of that sentence, or having requested or received a grant of city-controlled funds?
Yeah.
That's the part that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's exceeding 5% of the operating budget of that entity, of not the Westminster budget, but the entity, that entity's budget.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I don't necessarily have a big problem with that. I don't know how everybody else feels. I mean, I kind of understand where you're coming from with that.
That didn't bother me.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. The change regarding lobbyists is a change to state law, so that's just a conforming.
Okay.
16.4.
16-4A2, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Okay, so on the next page, under B2, that new subsection about what employees of the city can't do. They can't perform work for or provide services to a customer of an entity from which that person or that person's relative gets compensation that is also doing business with the city. That was a suggestion of a particular councilperson, really addressing business circumstances of himself that he felt he should not participate in.
So explain that to me in a layman. Give me layman example.
Okay, so you work, let's say me. I can't provide services to a client who is doing business with this, who is also doing business with the city, because that would be a conflict of interest for me.
Gotcha. And you're trying to make that clear that an employee cannot do, or employee or an elected official can't do something similar in that regard.
Right.
Okay.
It applies to both employees and elected officials.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that doesn't bother me either.
No, it doesn't jump out at me.
Okay.
Kevin, do you agree?
Yes, yes.
I believe the change in C is one that conforms to the state model.
Okay.
The changes in E about prestige of office also conform to the state model.
I have a comment about that. That conforms with the state model, but that, gosh, that sometimes seems a little bit of a gray. You know what I mean? Like,
what is the distinction between the underlined sections and the shaded underlined sections?
The shading should have been removed before I sent it to you. It was intended to highlight certain provisions.
Okay. So these are all the same.
but this is in conformance with the state anyway. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
I'm
Yeah,
just
that's
rolling
really-
through it to
That's
make
always
sure.
a tricky one, I think, in terms of use of prestige of the office such as it is to gain personal gain.
People do tend to have a problem with understanding really all of the things that can constitute using the prestige of office for gain, for their gain or for the gain of someone else. I think this section trips up a lot of folks. So it will be worthwhile. And one of the things the city administrator and I have been talking about is doing some training after the adoption for both elected officials and for employees to talk about what these things mean and some examples of things that a lot of people think may, would be permitted activity that really aren't.
I think that's an excellent idea, because I could really, when I read through this, I could totally see somebody accidentally committing an ethics violation without any kind of malicious intent.
Right.
Well, and training would be important.
And particularly for employees and appointed officials who may not ever really have any cause to sit down and do a close reading of this ordinance.
Yes.
So,
I think the training idea is an excellent idea.
So that's on the agenda for Barb and I to have further discussion about. Okay, so the change to the deadlines for filing statements.
Okay.
That's in section 3 of the ordinance under 16-5A2.
Mm-hmm.
That is just to conform. There were changes in the dates that were both intended to conform the filing date for appointed officials with the filing date for elected officials, and then this change to make sure that we got the distribution of the forms out in a time period that would allow people to get them back on time.
I also really like the fact that we are now, the city is now providing a list of entities that, because when I've read through this, at times I've thought to myself, well, how would I know? Like, you know what I mean? So the fact that we're providing an actual list, I think is very important. Yeah,
so we have in previous years provided that list, but it wasn't to people who asked. But it wasn't codified, and it really should go to everybody so everybody knows. So.
Yeah, I like that.
This is a bizarre question, but do we have the employees and officials sign that they have read the ethics commission laws, that we have them on file, that they understand there are ethic laws?
Probably not. I can bring that up with a new HR director, because I believe that employees sign for receipt of the personnel manual. And so I don't think it would be difficult.
I was only thinking, if we have revised this and we are now in compliance with the state, we should also have the employees and officials on record that they are aware of all the things.
It's not a bad idea, Kevin. It's not a bad idea to have the people that are affected by the ordinance acknowledge that they have actually read through it, because then it kind of creates informed consent, or whatever however you want to say it, that they can't go, well, I never really read through it. Well, you signed something where you said you read through it.
Right.
You could do that at the training as well. If you have training, you could just have them sign something right there. They read it and they got training. So then it's kind of hard for them to turn around and, I didn't really, so be a good idea.
At least have them acknowledge they received it. It might be difficult to force someone to say they understand it, because at times I wonder if I do too.
True.
But you could expand that, as Alyssa said, they have to acknowledge receipt of the personnel manual. They can acknowledge receipt of the ethics ordinance as well.
So I will make that suggestion to the city administrator and the HR director as a recommendation of this body, because I hear consensus on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
But 16-5 was the one thing I wrote good in the margin, because I think that's the city doing a service to these people to let them know who the entities are, so they can more accurately complete it.
Yeah. The remainder of the changes to that section on that page are just to conform the language to the actual process of becoming a candidate in the city. There's not really a certificate of nomination, so we made those changes.
And this is all in conformance with the state, nothing special that we've done.
I'm sorry, hold on one moment.
I think so.
Would you please excuse me for one moment?
Sure. I'll be right back myself.
It's down. I'm sorry, I should have disclosed at the beginning. This is the hour of the day during which there's no aide here for my dad who I'm taking care of. So I apologize. I had to attend to a phone call.
Are you okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Good.
Just made him take his own phone call. But I have to get up and get the phone to him because he's not mobile. So forgive me, and I apologize for the interruption.
Well, his hourly rate's greater than yours, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's not unusual.
I think Dan may be off the call right now.
Should we give him a minute?
Yeah, he said he'd just be away for a minute.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. So the provision on the top of page 5 about the consequences of failing to file a statement, that is new and not technically required by the state ordinance, but I don't think it's a thing that's particularly burdensome. It's just a manner of enforcing the obligation on a candidate to file the disclosure statement.
Mm-hmm.
So just basically say that if they don't file it, their candidacy will be deemed withdrawal.
Right, because it's a condition of their candidacy that they file it.
I'm okay with that because they're supposed to do it as a candidate. So if you don't do it,
right. And this actually gives them another 5 days after getting the notice to do it. So it's not particularly, I think, draconian. You know, if somebody made a mistake, then they have an opportunity to cure that.
that's reasonable.
Okay, the text in subsection C is to conform with a change in the law that occurred 2 years ago or a year and a half ago.
About that's the one that's about redacting the home address and all that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
I do have a couple questions about the interest in real property.
Yep. So those changes were to conform with the state law. We didn't make anything more restrictive in this section, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
So the wherever is state law because
Yep. That was one of the primary things we were fighting with the state about because, and I still don't see how the disclosure by elected officials of vacation properties that they have in some other state is relevant to their service. But I was never successful in getting the state to agree with me on that, and it was part of our stalemate with them.
Well, and also when I look through, and again, as a side note, we don't need to, spend much time on it, but like when I look through under 3, 4, and 6, the date, when, and the manner in which the identity of the person from the interest was acquired. If it was like 10 or 15 years ago, how is that really relevant at this point in time? I get the fact that if I transfer a property within the year, I get that. But when we're talking about ancient history, I'm just like, how is this relevant? And then, then I somewhat get concerned too, if you're involved in certain things, and I get the identity of other persons with an interest in the property, but it just, if I were running for office and looking at this, it would give me a little bit of pause. Let me put it that way.
The old one or the new one?
The way it's written now, like, you know what I mean? Because you have to close everything and anything.
Yeah.
This was the entire section E, to me, is the most problematic of this. And what I was trying to figure out is if that is just simply repeating what the state requires, then we're stuck with it. But I would not run for office if I had to report all of this with my certificate of candidacy. I mean, if I read this correctly, does a candidate have to, or a council member have to report all the stock they own in any publicly traded company?
Not mutual funds. And I believe they only have to report the stock if it's more than a specific percentage of the entity. And I need to go back to the definitions.
Yeah, 3% or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 5% or something. Okay. You'd have to own a very large percentage of the business to have to report it.
All right.
But it gets into a lot of, the problem is, Damien, it gets into a lot of, like, if you manage a lot of properties or have ownership in a lot of different real properties, or you have private partnerships and all that, it does create quite a burden. But again, while it's upsetting, or I have, the state is mandating it, the city council at this point in time is done fighting that war, and I kind of get that. So it is what it is. But,
Well, to me, they should have fought on. Alyssa did a fantastic job of holding them at bay for what, 10 years?
I did. Honestly, I don't think that ball would ever have moved. It would have just stayed there right on the line between the teams indefinitely. But there are, adverse media consequences to continuing to fight with the state. The city is one of a very few number of jurisdictions that continues to be on the bad list that the State Ethics Commission maintains. So there's this implication that you all are doing something underhanded and unethical, when in fact there were really valid arguments in favor of your process being a better manner of disclosing actual conflicts. So,
right. Well, I agree with Dan.
And thank you for the compliment, by the way.
And what's done is done. I mean, I think they could just move on to another fight. We'll just have to see how much of a deterrent this serves to potential business people running for council or mayor.
So I think one of the things that influenced the council to move in this direction was that most of the rest of the state had done so without seeing measurable adverse impacts in terms of the people running for office. Now, measurable is sort of hard to get your hands around because maybe you would have seen better qualified candidates. There's no way of knowing that, but there wasn't the shortage of candidates that we predicted would happen, at least not broadly across the state.
And the problem is, like, you could try to get the state to amend it, but whenever you get into these very technical things, if they're amending the ethics ordinance, then, the story becomes, oh, they're trying to, it looks bad. And, it's just,
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Nobody wanted to touch the changes once they were in place because it looked like they were walking back on ethics, and that's a political loser across the board, even though that wasn't the case.
No, because I really do. I agree with Damien. The idea of like disclosing I get disclosing ownership of properties that are in the city or in the municipality or the government that you're working within. But the fact that I own a property in Pennsylvania, I don't see how that has any relevance to, you know, my service as a council person.
Yeah, unless you had some special deal on it because you had ties to some developer who was doing business in the city, right? So that would be legit disclosable, right?
Sure.
And that's what we tried to cover before. So.
But again, I think I understand, you know, the city's tired of fighting it, and I get it. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so.
There is a typo on page 7.
Okay, where?
Section D, composed primarily of holdings of sticks.
You don't like that? Then you don't have to disclose any of your stocks.
I'm thinking
that is pretty good. I like that, Damien. I did not catch that one.
You make a note to make sure I get that.
The kids couldn't promise when they were little, so it caught my eye.
Right? Okay. The change in B, where it says any interest was transferred in whole or in part, et cetera, that's a conformance issue.
Okay.
So if you scroll down to sources of earned income.
Mm-hmm.
That highlighted item 9 is more strict, is a requirement that is more strict than state law.
Huh.
Explain what that's trying to do.
One moment. Oh, so first let me say that the language immediately above that, the C language about individual spouse being a lobbyist, that is a compliance issue with the new change that went into effect recently. So under 9, it goes to that same issue we were talking about earlier, about wanting to make sure you're not, that the filer discloses sources of income that are coming indirectly from somebody doing business with the city. There was a feeling that an elected official or certain employees might, I'm sorry, this is just for elected officials and candidates. There was a feeling that some of them might be beholden to interests because they indirectly have a benefit because their employer has a contract with somebody who's doing business with the city.
So this requires a disclosure.
Yes, requires the disclosure of other clients of your employer who have contracts with the city.
Clients of your employer who have contracts with the city. That could get. What do you think about that, Damien?
I'm trying to create a hypothetical.
That's
So
what I'm trying to do.
if I'm on the council and my son works for a company that has a contract with the city, I'm to disclose that, right?
No, if you're on the council and your employer, i.e. your law firm, has a client who's doing business with the city, you would have to disclose that
Okay.
because you're gaining monetarily in theory,
Right.
from the relationship between that client and the city.
But how? But that becomes. I guess I feel like that's a slippery slope. I'm thinking like from Damien's standpoint or from my standpoint, like, you know, like I could have a client or customer that comes to me to sell or buy a house or for insurance, and would I necessarily know that they're doing business with the city?
That is a good point. Perhaps a recommendation to the council might be to say that is known to the filer to be doing business with the city, which doesn't require you to ask.
I think you have to do something like that because otherwise, like in theory, like for somebody like Damien or myself who have a lot of clients and customers, perceivably everybody who has insurance with us, which is well over 1,000 people, you know, like what am I going to ask them whether they, you know, do business with the city? I mean, this is
Well, they'll be on that list that the city is distributing.
you know, but for me, like I work on the real estate end of my operation. I don't have a list of everybody that we have insurance with because that's another operation, but technically it's all under one umbrella. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just like making it very burdensome.
Yeah.
So, you know, and like, you know, you're really kind of getting far away from it seems very indirect. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree with me, Damien? I mean, it just seems very indirect.
Well, just specific to the law profession, I'm wondering if I can ethically reveal that we represent anybody without them saying it's okay, but.
True.
So.
I mean, there has to be, you know, I get it, but, you know, I get that we have an ethic, you know, but also there's a burden. I remember talking to Tim Burke when I was named to planning and zoning. Like, you know, there has to be some sort of faith that people like, you know, if I have somebody come in front of my board and I feel that it's you know, comfortable for one reason or the other, I recuse myself. But it's like, it's like, when you try to get too far into legislating everything, it becomes a little bit, you know, it's like who in their right mind would agree to serve? Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
You have to have some faith that people, if something is problematic, somebody will speak up. Not everybody is.
Well, I grew up in Prince George's County, so I have no such faith, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I just think this is hard. To me, this is a very, I find this one problematic, Damien. In my humble opinion, is problematic. I think that I guess what were you trying to get at, and is there a different way to get at it without making it so?
Well, this came from a particular elected official who wanted everything to be really squeaky clean and above board.
Well, at this point, all we could do, and all Alyssa could do, I guess, is relay the commission's concerns about any provision. This looks like it's the first one that we're going to weigh in on as possibly objecting to. And I guess the basis would be we find it to be too broad, logistically difficult to enforce, and in some instances, ethically questionable.
Yeah, and it's perfectly, Damien, from reading through the ethics, they're supposed to run this by us anyway, so it's perfectly within our rights to say, hey, city council, we think you're making a mistake and we don't like it. We can make that stand.
True.
We're the ethics commission, so, they can do what they want to do, but we don't have to agree with it. Lord knows I have that issue with the planning and zoning for Carroll County. So I got a problem out of everything that we've read. I got a problem with that one because I think it just creates a kind of a minefield of like trying to figure out how you comply with something like that, depending on what kind of business you're in.
It will be difficult in many instances to adhere to it.
Okay.
But, we have to voice our objection or at least our reservations, because if they pass it, we have to enforce it. So.
Yep. I will convey your objections on the grounds that it is indirect, overbroad, logistically difficult, and ethically impossible under certain circumstances.
That's, besides
True.
that, Lincoln, how'd you like the play, right? That's enough to me to call the provision into question, but.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah. Okay. So then we're moving into the financial disclosure for certain employees and appointed officials. And here it's in this section where they really made a lot of changes to add disclosure requirements. So the first changes in 1A bring into the scope of the ordinance some individuals who weren't previously listed. I think because when your ordinance was first listed, those positions didn't exist. And then in C, 3, 4, 5, and 6, those are all things that are not required. So they are all additional strictures that were designed to deal with specific instances in which it appeared or has appeared that folks are doing stuff that other folks would prefer they not to.
So these are 3, 4, 5, and 6 are extra provisions that aren't in the state.
Yeah.
That is a requirement of the candidates and then these certain employees.
These are not necessarily requirements of the candidates, but they are requirements of the employees.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry. So
These are department heads, aren't they?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay.
And me.
do you have a problem with 3?
I don't, to me, I look at this differently because I think for an employee and department head especially, these might just be the cost of doing business and holding that position as opposed to an elected official where you often have to pull teeth to get them to run for office.
Right.
These, I don't think these are unduly burdensome for someone who's going to get paid $100,000 a year to work for the city.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. My only question is, when it talks about has a personal relationship involving 2 or more private social engagements in the preceding year, help define that for me a little bit more. Like what? So if I go to a ball, is that a private social engagement? And I see somebody there? And they happen to be there. I didn't go with them, but they're there when I go.
Right. I would say not. But if you had them over to your house, I would say yes. When I first tried to craft some language here, I was said about it in a different way that also didn't seem to work very well. So it may be that this requires rewording, but I think you sort of get at what it's getting at.
Yeah, I don't think a private social engagement includes the endless, events that we go
But you
to,
have to go to, right?
and the grin and grips and the hospital ball and all of that.
When I read it or saw it, I was thinking if I sat at a certain table with people, maybe then you would count that. But if I saw them across the room, I don't think I was there to, I may say hello, engage them. I don't think that is anything what they are trying to get out.
So I intended the use of the word private to exclude those kinds of gatherings that you all are talking about. However, there may be a better way to go about that.
Yeah, I feel like private social engagement is not clearly defined and could be in the eye of the beholder. And that's what concerns me, is when you read it, I could see 5 different people reading that same section and having 5 different opinions on what private social engagement means.
Okay.
That's my, that's what the rub is. So I get what you're getting at, but I think that it might need a little bit more work to kind of clearly define. You're talking about somebody that, you're basically a close friend to.
That's, yeah,
That's what you're really getting at.
that is what I'm getting at.
I
Yeah.
don't think that's necessarily the case. I like private social engagement with some refinement, because what it suggests is you were invited to be there.
Right.
And that, even if you're invited and you've never met the host before, you might be invited for a reason that has to do with, promoting business with the city. And that should be disclosed if it's 2 or more, or if it's constant. And that is distinguished between us showing up at these various charity events and just happening to sit next to somebody. But if you're invited to a party, there's a purpose. Could be a purpose behind that invitation.
Yeah, there could be.
Maybe massage the language or thing. That's my concern, is I could just see people reading it and coming up with different ideas of what it means, which concerns me.
How about if I try to give that assignment some thought, and send you all some suggestions. We won't have time, I think, to have another formal meeting before council introduces this, but I don't think they're going to introduce and adopt at the same meeting, so we might have time to come back together and talk about it again. But I will act as promptly as I can to do something about this troublesome language.
Yeah, I think you just need some time to think about it and maybe see if we can come up with a better way.
And if you collectively have suggestions that you want to send my way, I'd be very grateful.
We have another meeting set for December 1st, right?
Yeah. So actually, if they introduce in early November, they could theoretically not adopt it till their first meeting in December. It would still be in time.
Mhm. Okay. Any other between 3, 4, 5, and 6, Dan, that you have a problem with?
No, nothing necessarily.
No.
I mean, no one else had a problem, right? I mean, I get what your
No.
point is related to this.
Mhm.
My whole big issue was the personal relationship and better defining what that means.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, so Ian, F is a conforming provision to state law. I think E, we just was at the request of a specific council person who we had given them that information, but wanted it codified.
Yeah.
So, and then new 16-6.1 is just so folks like you all will still be signing the same form you've been signing without those additional provisions that we just went over, which will apply to employees.
Good.
All right.
That sort of takes us to the end.
Well, it's not half as bad as I thought it was. I thought the city was sort of
Going off
imposing
the deep end.
itself. Yeah,
Yes.
indeed. But you fought the good fight, Alyssa, but c'est la vie.
I tried.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we have a concern about is the one that was on page 8.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing.
Mhm.
Agreed.
And Alyssa, if you think of a different way to kind of accomplish some of what you want to accomplish there, but make it less all the things we said, you had a good list of 4 things, then, that's an idea too. That could
Okay.
still maybe achieve part of your goal without it being so broad and difficult to kind of really comply with.
Right.
I'm assuming the revisions to the forms are all just matching what we did in the ordinance. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so if the ordinance changes in any of these respects, I will bring back another round of the forms. You'll have time to prove them before they have to go out anyway, especially since we're meeting in
So we
December.
don't need to go through all the forms right now because they're just matching what the ordinance says. So
Yeah, unless I really screwed up.
yeah. So we can do, because we have time, we don't need to get these out till
January.
Yeah, so we have time to kind of, once they pass the ordinance, fine tune whatever, to review the forms one more time to make sure they're all good. So, in other words, we don't need to spend the time to go through all this tonight, is my feeling, Damien. Don't you agree? The form.
I agree. I can wait.
Yeah,
Yes.
let's do the ordinance first, and then, we can deal with the forms.
Okay.
Agreed.
Alyssa, did you have any other business?
I don't believe we did.
Wasn't there, don't we have to have another meeting, or I got some kind of notification? Do we have to have a closed session?
You got a notification for a closed session in case we needed. I wanted Shannon to set one up that could run concurrently in case we needed to adjourn into closed session, because we're not running the Facebook feed where we instead posted a link for people to join us here. And so it was necessary to have a separate room.
Only if we needed it. Understand.
Yeah.
There's no business that we need to address that way. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
All right. Well, then I guess I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Very good. Thank you all.
Thank
Take
you.